Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we delve into the fascinating stories of the past. Today, we're going to explore one of the most pivotal conflicts in European history, the War of Austrian Succession. This complex and multifaceted war was sparked by a succession crisis in the Habsburg Empire, and it would go on to involve many of the major powers of Europe. As we begin our journey through this tumultuous period, let's set the stage with a brief overview of the events that led up to the war. The Habsburg Empire, with its vast territories and complex web of alliances, was facing a crisis of succession in the early 18th century. Emperor Charles VI, who had ruled since 1711, was aging and had no male heirs. This created a power vacuum that would eventually draw in many of the major powers of Europe. To understand the roots of this conflict, we must travel back to the early 18th century, when Charles VI was attempting to secure the future of his empire. In 1713, he issued the Pragmatic Sanction, a decree that allowed for the female line to inherit the throne in the absence of male heirs. This move was an attempt to prevent the fragmentation of the empire and ensure the continuation of Habsburg rule. However, not all European powers were pleased with this development. The Pragmatic Sanction was met with resistance from several states, including Bavaria, Saxony, and Prussia, which had their own claims to parts of the Habsburg territories. Meanwhile, other powers like France and Spain saw an opportunity to expand their influence in Europe by challenging the dominance of the Habsburgs. As we explore the historical context of the War of Austrian Succession, it's essential to consider the complex web of alliances that existed at the time. The Treaty of Utrecht, signed in 1713, had established a fragile peace in Europe, but it also created an environment in which rivalries and tensions could simmer just below the surface. In Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The city's grand palaces and opulent opera houses were abuzz with intrigue and anxiety, as the news of Charles VI's declining health spread throughout the empire. The Habsburg court, with its complex hierarchy and Byzantine politics, was a hotbed of factionalism and rivalries, as various cliques and interest groups jockeyed for position in anticipation of the impending succession crisis. At the center of this maelstrom was Maria Theresa, the young archduchess who stood poised to inherit the throne. Born on May 13, 1717, in Vienna, Maria Theresa was the eldest daughter of Charles VI and his wife, Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. Educated in the traditional manner of Habsburg princesses, Maria Theresa was well versed in the arts, music, and literature, but she had also received a thorough grounding in politics and statecraft. As the clock ticked down to the eventual demise of Charles VI, the European powers watched with bated breath, each waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Frederick II of Prussia, also known as Frederick the Great, was one of the key players in this drama. From his perch in Berlin, he watched with great interest as the Habsburg Empire teetered on the brink of chaos. Sensing an opportunity to expand his own territories and secure a lasting legacy for Prussia, Frederick II began to secretly mobilize his military forces, poised to strike at the vulnerable Habsburg Empire. The stage was now set for the great powers of Europe to clash in a struggle that would test their mettle, challenge their resolve, and forever alter the balance of power on the continent. The War of Austrian Succession was about to unleash a maelstrom of conflict, diplomacy, and intrigue that would engulf the continent, drawing in many of the major powers of Europe. As we conclude our examination of the precursors to the War of Austrian Succession, we find ourselves poised on the cusp of a new era, one marked by great upheaval and transformation. Welcome back to our exploration of the War of Austrian Succession, one of the most pivotal conflicts in European history. The war began in 1740, when Frederick II of Prussia, also known as Frederick the Great, invaded Silesia, a prosperous region in Eastern Europe that was then part of the Habsburg Empire. This bold move was a direct challenge to the authority of Maria Theresa, who had recently inherited the throne. The invasion of Silesia sparked a wider conflict, as other European powers began to take sides. The Kingdom of Prussia, under Frederick's leadership, was joined by Bavaria, Saxony, and France, while the Habsburg Empire was supported by Great Britain, Hanover, and the Dutch Republic. The war would eventually spread to multiple fronts, including Italy, the Netherlands, and the Americas. One of the key factors that contributed to the complexity of the conflict was the system of alliances that had developed in Europe over the preceding decades. The Treaty of Utrecht, signed in 1713, had established a fragile peace, but it also created a web of obligations and rivalries that would shape the course of the war. For example, the British government, led by Prime Minister Robert Walpole, was committed to defending the territorial integrity of the Habsburg Empire, while also seeking to limit the growth of French power in Europe. As the war unfolded, Maria Theresa proved to be a shrewd and determined leader who would stop at nothing to defend her empire. She traveled extensively throughout her territories, rallying support among her subjects and negotiating with foreign leaders to secure alliances and financial backing. Her efforts were rewarded in 1741, when she was crowned Queen of Hungary, a move that helped to solidify her position and bolster her legitimacy. Meanwhile, Frederick II of Prussia was proving to be a formidable military commander who would earn his reputation as one of the greatest generals in European history. His victories at Mollwitz and Chauty-Sitz in 1741 demonstrated his tactical genius and cemented his control over Silesia. However, his successes were not without cost, as the war was exacting a heavy toll on the Prussian economy and military. The conflict also had significant implications for the European balance of power. The rise of Prussia, as a major military power, challenged the dominance of the Habsburg Empire and created a new rival for influence in Central Europe. At the same time, the war marked the beginning of a long period of British involvement in European affairs, as the British government sought to counterbalance French power and protect its own interests on the continent. As we explore this pivotal moment in European history, it's essential to consider the human cost of the conflict. The War of Austrian Succession was a brutal and devastating conflict that would claim thousands of lives, displace countless civilians, and leave deep scars on the communities affected by the fighting. The war also had significant cultural and economic impacts, as trade and commerce were disrupted, and artistic and intellectual life were transformed by the experience of conflict. In conclusion, the period between 1740 and 1748 was a time of great upheaval and transformation in Europe, marked by the clash of rival powers, the rise of new military leaders, and the reshaping of the continent's balance of power. Welcome back to our exploration of the War of Austrian Succession, one of the most pivotal conflicts in European history. As we continue our journey through this complex and fascinating period, we find ourselves in the midst of a tumultuous landscape, where alliances are shifting, armies are clashing, and the very fabric of Europe is being reshaped. The year 1745 marked a significant turning point in the conflict, as Maria Theresa's forces, bolstered by British support, launched a series of successful campaigns against the Prussians and their allies. The Battle of Hohenfriedberg, fought on June 4, 1745, was a decisive victory for the Austrians, with Frederick II's army suffering heavy losses. This defeat forced Frederick to re-evaluate his strategy and seek new alliances to counterbalance the growing strength of the Habsburg Empire. Meanwhile, the French, under the leadership of King Louis XV, were facing their own challenges on multiple fronts. The British Navy was exerting significant pressure on French shipping and trade, while the Austrians and their allies were pushing deep into French territory in the Netherlands and Italy. In response, the French launched a series of bold counterattacks, including the Battle of Fontenoy, fought on May 11, 1745, which saw a combined force of French and Irish troops defeat a British and Hanoverian army. As the war raged on, the human cost continued to mount. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, forced to flee their homes, and struggled to survive amidst the chaos. The conflict also had significant cultural and economic impacts, as trade and commerce were disrupted, and artistic and intellectual life were transformed by the experience of conflict. For example, the war saw a surge in patriotic literature and art, as writers and artists sought to rally support for their respective causes. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, signed on October 18, 1748, marked the official end of the War of Austrian Succession. The treaty recognized Prussian control over Silesia, while also acknowledging British supremacy at Sedan. However, the treaty did little to address the underlying tensions and rivalries that had driven the conflict in the first place. Instead, it set the stage for a new era of competition and confrontation between Europe's great powers. In the aftermath of the war, Maria Theresa emerged as one of the most influential leaders in Europe, determined to rebuild and strengthen her empire. She implemented a series of significant reforms, including the creation of a more efficient administrative system, the promotion of trade and commerce, and the establishment of a powerful military. These efforts would help to cement Austria's position as a dominant power in Central Europe and pave the way for the country's future growth and prosperity. As we conclude our exploration of the War of Austrian Succession, it is clear that this conflict had far-reaching consequences for European history. The war marked the beginning of a new era of great power rivalry, as Prussia, Austria, Britain, and France vied for influence and dominance on the continent. It also saw the emergence of new military leaders, the development of innovative tactics and strategies, and the transformation of the European balance of power. In reflecting on this pivotal moment in history, it is worth considering the words of the great historian, Winston Churchill, who once said, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." As we look back on the War of Austrian Succession, we gain a deeper understanding of the complex and often fraught nature of international relations, and the enduring lessons that can be drawn from this fascinating period in European history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, and I hope you will join me again as we explore more of the intriguing stories and events that have shaped our world. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.